The bass from the live band rattled through the floorboards of the Tulsa Country Club, vibrating straight up my legs. I gripped my water glass so tight, the icy condensation left my fingers numb. The air in the ballroom smelled of roasted tenderloin, spun sugar, and imported orchids. I was 29 years old, and I worked 50 hours a week in medical billing just to pay my rent. My dress was a simple navy shift I bought on clearance 3 years ago. I did not belong in this room, and the bride was about to make sure I knew it. Vanessa caught my eye from across the dance floor. My 34-year-old sister wore a custom silk gown that cost more than my car. She whispered something to her new wealthy husband, handed him her champagne flute, and marched in my direction. Her heels clicked sharply over the music. She stopped 2 feet away. She did not offer a hug. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my chest. "You are too poor to be family," Vanessa said. Her voice was low, a razor wrapped in velvet, making sure the high society guests at the nearby tables could not hear. "Sit quietly and do not embarrass us today." Our mother Barbara stepped up right behind her. She smoothed the front of her tailored silver dress. She did not flinch at those words. She did not offer a defense for her youngest daughter. "Your sister is right, Selena," our mother said, adjusting her diamond earring. "Know your place. You do not fit the aesthetic here. Brad's family is very prominent. Just stay out of the professional photos and try not to talk to anyone important." If you have ever had your own family treat you like you do not belong simply because you do not have their money, you know exactly how cold that room felt. Welcome to Grape Vengeance, where we tell true stories about boundaries, justice, and the moment a scapegoat finally fights back. Let me know your age and where you are watching from in the comments below, because today is for everyone who refused to stay in the corner. For 29 years, this was my assigned role. I was the financial safety net, the quiet shadow, the punching bag they kept around to make themselves feel taller. They expected me to lower my head, blink back tears, and shrink away. They expected the shame to keep me silent. I did not cry, I did not argue, I did not raise my voice to match the cruelty in theirs. I smiled, set my water glass on a passing waiter's silver tray, and turned my back on them. I pushed through the heavy oak doors. The hallway was quiet, the thick wood muting the party inside. I pulled my phone from my clutch and dialed a number I had kept ready for weeks. "Serve her now," I said when my attorney answered on the first ring. Through the glass partition, I watched the timeline unfold. Vanessa adjusted her veil and picked up the microphone for her grand toast. She radiated triumph. She looked out at the 200 wealthy guests, ready to deliver a speech about her flawless new life. Then, the music stopped mid-note. The sudden silence swept through the room like a cold front. A man in a rumpled gray suit walked past the security guard at the side entrance. He did not care about the floral arrangements or the expensive drapery. He stepped directly onto the monogrammed dance floor. He held a thick manila envelope in his right hand. He called my sister's name. The sound bounced off the high ceiling. Vanessa forced a polite, confused smile. She assumed it was a telegram or a surprise gift from a wealthy relative. She reached out and took the envelope. She pulled out the first page. I watched her eyes scan the header. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale and hollow. The microphone slipped from her fingers. It hit the hardwood floor, sending a sharp, piercing screech through the speakers. Then she screamed. The path to that single perfect moment started 6 months earlier on a quiet Tuesday evening in my small apartment. 6 months before the band stopped playing and my sister dropped her microphone, I was sitting at my laminate kitchen table eating reheated pasta out of a plastic container. It was a quiet Tuesday evening in early April. The Oklahoma wind was rattling the single-pane windows of my cheap apartment. I was 29 years old, and my entire life was built around a singular, quiet goal. I wanted to buy a townhouse. I worked 50 hours a week as a medical billing specialist for a large hospital network. The job was not glamorous. My days were spent fighting with insurance companies, tracking down denied claims, and looking for numerical errors buried in hundreds of pages of patient charts. It required a ruthless attention to detail and a refusal to take no for an answer. That job paid my rent and allowed me to put a small amount into savings every single month. For 3 years, I denied myself vacations, new clothes, and dinners out. I drove a 10-year-old sedan with a dent in the passenger door. Every spare dollar went toward my townhouse fund. I just wanted a quiet place with where nobody could tell me I was not good enough. That evening, I pushed my empty food container aside and opened my laptop. I had finally saved enough for a modest down payment. The next step was getting a mortgage pre-approval letter from my bank. I felt a rare spark of pride as I typed my password into the banking portal. I had always been meticulous with my finances. My credit score had always been in the excellent tier. I clicked the tab to generate my free credit report, ready to see the numbers that would buy my freedom. The screen loaded. A red warning banner flashed across the top of the web page. I blinked, rubbing my tired eyes, thinking it was a system error, but the numbers did not change. My credit score had plummeted by 200 points. It was sitting in the severe risk category. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. My heart started to beat in a heavy, slow rhythm against my ribs. I set my computer mouse down and took a sharp breath. People who grow up with money might panic and call their parents when something goes wrong. People who grow up as the family scapegoat learn very quickly that they have to solve their own problems. I clicked into the detailed breakdown of the report. My eyes scanned the lines of data looking for the anomaly. I found it under the secured debt column. Someone had opened a personal loan in my name. The principal amount was $150,000. The air in my apartment suddenly felt very thin. $150,000 was more money than I made in 3 years. I did not own a house yet. I did not have assets worth that much cash. How could any bank authorize a loan that large in my name? I scrolled further down the page, reading the fine print of the origination documents attached to the credit alert. The loan was collateralized. It was secured by real estate. The screen listed a parcel number. I recognized that parcel number instantly, and a wave of pure nausea washed over me. It was the 50-acre plot of undeveloped ranch land outside the city limits. My father had passed away 5 years ago. He was a quiet man who spent most of his life letting my mother run the household and dictate the rules. But in his final months, he saw exactly how my mother and Vanessa treated me. He saw the subtle insults, the financial demands, and the way they pushed me aside. When his will was read, my mother and sister were shocked to learn he had left the 50 acres of land solely to me. It was not worth millions, but it was a solid piece of property. My father had told me to hold on to it. He told me it would be my safety net when they eventually turned their backs on me. Now someone had used my father's final gift as leverage for a massive cash payout. I looked at the payment history on the screen. The loan had been originated 4 months ago. No payments had ever been made. It was 90 days past due. Late fees were piling up every single week. A notice of default was pending. In a matter of weeks, the bank would initiate foreclosure proceedings. They would seize the land to cover the stolen money, and my credit would be destroyed for the next decade. My dream of buying a townhouse was dead. I was standing on the edge of bankruptcy, and I had not spent a single dime. I traced the disbursement of the funds. The $150,000 had been wired directly into the checking account of a corporate entity I had never heard of. It was listed as an LLC with a generic consulting name. I did not cry. I did not throw my laptop against the wall. The fear in my chest hardened into something sharp and cold. My professional instincts took over. In medical billing, you learn that criminals always leave a paper trail. People who steal money always make a mistake because greed makes them sloppy. I opened a new tab on my web browser and navigated to the Oklahoma Secretary of State Business Registry. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I typed in the exact name of the LLC that had received the stolen funds. The search icon spun for a few agonizing seconds. The business registration document appeared on my screen. It listed the date of incorporation, the registered agent, and the primary mailing address. I stared at the address. It was a large 4-bedroom house in an upscale suburban neighborhood on the north side of the city. I knew that address by heart. I had mailed a birthday card to that exact address 3 weeks ago. It was Vanessa's house. The puzzle pieces snapped together with a sickening clarity. My older sister had stolen my social security number. She had forged my signature on a deed of trust. She had somehow found a notary to validate the fake documents. She had taken out a secured loan against the only valuable thing I owned, and she had funneled the cash directly into her own pockets. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark kitchen. Why would she take such an insane risk? Vanessa made decent money as a marketing manager, but she always lived beyond her means. She leased luxury cars she could not afford and bought designer bags to impress women who did not care about her. Then I thought about Brad. Brad was her new fiancé. He owned 3 highly successful car dealerships in the state. He came from old local money. His family belonged to the most exclusive country club in the region. Since the day Vanessa met him, she had been twisting herself into knots trying to prove she belonged in his social circle. She wanted a society wedding. She wanted the imported flowers, the custom silk gown, and the catered rehearsal dinners. She wanted to look like a wealthy heiress marrying a wealthy businessman. But Vanessa did not have the cash to fund a high society wedding. Our mother did not have that kind of cash either. Brad had offered to pay for a modest ceremony, but Vanessa had proudly told him her family would handle the arrangements. She told his mother that we were a proud, established family. She needed a fortune to keep up the lie. So she decided to steal mine. Vanessa had decided that her wedding aesthetic was worth destroying my entire financial future. She was willing to let my father's land go into foreclosure just so she could buy champagne and ice sculptures for a room full of strangers. She looked at me, her own flesh and blood, and saw nothing but a disposable credit line. I printed the credit report. I printed the business registry page showing her home address. I printed the parcel number of the land. I gathered the warm sheets of paper from my cheap desktop printer and stacked them neatly on the kitchen counter. I knew Vanessa was reckless, but a forged real estate transaction required multiple steps. It required access to my original birth certificate and my Social Security card. Those documents were locked inside a fireproof safe at my mother's house. I had asked my mother for them years ago when I moved out, but she had insisted on keeping them for safety reasons. Vanessa could not have accessed that safe without the combination. A new, darker realization settled over me. The betrayal was not just isolated to a greedy sister. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door and picked up the stack of printed evidence. I did not bother to change out of my work scrubs. I walked out into the cold night air and got into my car. I was driving to my mother's house, and I was not going to leave until I knew exactly who had sold me out. The drive across town took 20 minutes. The streetlights flickered against the windshield of my 10-year-old sedan. My knuckles ached from gripping the steering wheel. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, but my mind was spinning through 100 different scenarios. Part of me, the small, naive part that still wanted a normal family, hoped there was a logical explanation. Maybe my identity was stolen by a stranger. Maybe Vanessa was a victim too. Maybe my mother would be horrified and help me fix it. But the cold, hard evidence sitting on my passenger seat told a different story. The LLC was registered to my sister's exact home address. The facts were written in black ink. I turned into the upscale suburban neighborhood where I grew up. The manicured lawns and tall oak trees looked identical under the moonlight. I parked in the driveway of the 2-story brick house. My mother, Barbara, received this property in the divorce settlement before my father passed away. She always cared more about the appearance of the real estate than the people living inside it. I grabbed the stack of printed documents and walked up the concrete path. I did not knock. I used my spare key and pushed the front door open. The entryway smelled of expensive vanilla wax melts and lemon polish. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of a television playing in the living room. I walked down the hardwood hallway toward the kitchen. The bright overhead pendant lights illuminated the large granite island. My mother sat on a velvet bar stool. She wore a silk blouse, and her blonde hair was styled in neat waves. She held a calligraphy pen in her right hand. Spread across the stone counter were dozens of thick, cream-colored envelopes. Gold foil sparkled under the light. She was addressing wedding invitations. She looked peaceful. She looked like a woman who did not have a single care in the world, while my entire financial future was burning to the ground. "Wipe your shoes, Selena," my mother said, without looking up from her task. "I just paid the cleaning service to scrub the floors. I did not wipe my shoes. I walked straight to the island and stopped across from her. I placed the stack of papers directly on top of the blank invitations. The top page was the credit report showing the $150,000 loan. The red warning banner was printed in stark black and white. "Look at this," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Someone took out a secured loan in my name and used Dad's 50 acres as collateral. The money went to an LLC registered to Vanessa's house." I waited for the shock. I waited for my mother to drop her expensive pen and gasp. I waited for her to ask me how this could happen. Barbara did not gasp. She did not look surprised. She let out a long, exasperated sigh and rolled her eyes. She set her pen down, picked up her ceramic mug, and took a slow sip of her coffee. She glanced at the papers, then looked up at me with an expression of mild annoyance. "I told Vanessa to intercept your mail so you would not see the bank notices yet," Barbara said, her tone casual and flat. "She must have missed the digital credit bureau alert." The kitchen went entirely still. The hum of the refrigerator sounded deafening. My own mother was sitting there, drinking coffee, admitting she knew my sister had committed federal wire fraud. "You knew," I whispered, the betrayal sinking into my bones like ice. "You knew she forged my signature." "Do not be dramatic, Selena," Barbara replied, waving a hand in the air. "Nobody forged anything sinister. We just needed a temporary solution. Vanessa is marrying into high society. Brad's family owns half the car dealerships in the state. They expect a certain caliber of event. We had to secure the country club, the imported floral arrangements, and the custom dress. If we did not put down the deposits, Brad's parents would think we were trash. We had to protect the family image." "She stole my identity," I said, pressing my hands flat against the cold granite. "She put a lien on the only piece of property I own. The loan is in default. The bank is going to foreclose on the land." Barbara sighed again, leaning forward. She rested her elbows on the counter, looking at me like I was a stubborn child refusing to share a toy. "You are single," Barbara explained, using her calmest, most condescending voice. "You rent an apartment. You do not need a prime credit score right now. Vanessa needs this wedding to secure her future. Once she marries Brad, she will have access to his trust fund. She can easily pay off that silly little loan before the bank actually takes the land. You just need to be patient and absorb the debt for a few months." The twisted logic hung in the air. She wanted me to ruin my life so my sister could pretend to be rich. "How did she get my social security card?" I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "How did she get my birth certificate? They were locked in the fireproof safe in your home office." Barbara did not even have the decency to look ashamed. She met my gaze head on. "I gave her the combination," Barbara said. "Your father never should have left that acreage to you anyway. It was a spiteful decision. He knew Vanessa was the older sister. He knew she deserved an inheritance to help her build a proper life. He gave it to you just to punish me because I favored her. We simply corrected his mistake. We used the land to fund the wedding. It is family property, Selena. You should be happy to contribute to your sister's happiness." I stared at the woman who raised me. I searched her eyes for any trace of guilt, any flicker of maternal instinct. There was nothing. I saw only calculation and a deep ingrained preference for her golden child. The family dynamic had always been unbalanced, but this was a new level of depravity. They did not just favor Vanessa, they viewed me as a disposable resource. My survival meant nothing to them. My dreams of buying a townhouse, my years of saving, my perfect financial record were all worthless compared to Vanessa's country club aesthetic. I realized in that exact moment that I was entirely alone. I had no mother, I had no sister, I had a pair of parasites who would drain my blood just to paint their own lips red. Barbara picked up her calligraphy pen. She pulled the stack of papers toward her and pushed them off the invitations. "So you are going to stay quiet," Barbara ordered, her voice hardening into a command. "You will not call the bank. You will not call the police. You will let Vanessa have her special day. Do not ruin this for her, Selena. If you cause a scene and embarrass us in front of Brad's family, I will make sure everyone in Tulsa knows how selfish and unstable you are. Take the hit for your sister. She will pay it back eventually." Most people would break down. Most daughters would scream, cry, and beg their mother to love them. I felt the urge to sweep the gold foil invitations onto the floor. I felt the urge to shout until my throat bled. But my medical billing background kicked in. In my profession, anger does not get claims paid. Evidence gets claims paid. Screaming would only show them my hand. Screaming would give them time to hide the stolen funds and cover their tracks. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to believe I was the same weak, compliant girl I had always been. I looked down at the credit report. I reached out and slowly gathered the printed pages. I tapped the edges against the granite counter, aligning them into a neat stack. I folded the papers in half and slipped them into the pocket of my work scrubs. "I understand," I said, keeping my voice hollow and defeated. Barbara smiled. It was a thin, victorious smile, depending her authority was final. "Good girl," Barbara said, returning her attention to the envelopes. "I knew you would see reason. Make sure you buy a decent dress for the ceremony. Try not to look so drab." I did not say goodbye. I turned around and walked back down the hardwood hallway. The scent of vanilla wax melted into the smell of my own cold sweat. I pushed the front door open and stepped out into the night. The crisp Oklahoma air hit my face, waking me up from the nightmare. I walked to my old sedan and unlocked the door. I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel. I did not feel sad anymore. The grief was gone, replaced by a sharp, surgical focus. They thought they could steal my future and order me to smile about it. They thought I would just lay down and let the bank take my father's land. I decided right then that I was going to destroy them both. I was not just going to report the fraud. I was going to let them build their perfect lie. I was going to let Vanessa put on her custom gown and stand in front of her wealthy new-in-laws. I was going to let them taste the life they stole before I burned it to ashes. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. The screen lit up the dark car. It was a text message from Vanessa. "The caterer for the bridal shower needs a final deposit," she wrote. "My accounts are tied up with wedding stuff right now. I need you to cover the $2,000. Bring a cashier's check to the shower this weekend. Do not be late." I stared at the glowing screen. She had just stolen $150,000 from me, and she was still demanding more. The audacity was breathtaking. But instead of ignoring the message, a cold plan formed in my mind. A cashier's check leaves a perfect, undeniable paper trail. I typed my reply. "No problem," I wrote back. "I will bring the check." I locked my phone and started the engine. The motor hummed a steady, reliable rhythm. The trap was set, and my sister had just handed me the rope. The next morning, I woke up before the sun crested over the Tulsa skyline. I did not feel exhausted. I felt an electric hum of purpose running through my veins. Facing a narcissist without a loaded weapon is a waste of breath. They will twist your words, deny reality, and make you look crazy. I was not going to argue with them anymore. I was going to bury them in their own paperwork. I picked up my phone and dialed my supervisor at the hospital billing department. I asked for 3 days of personal time. In 3 years, I had never called in sick. I worked holidays and picked up weekend shifts to build my savings. My supervisor approved the request without hesitation. I hung up the phone and got dressed. I put on a pair of dark slacks and a sensible blouse. I needed to look like a professional conducting an audit. My first stop was a local office supply store. I walked down the quiet aisles and purchased a thick black binder, a box of clear plastic protector sleeves, and a set of numbered tab dividers. I carried the items to the register and paid in cash. This binder was going to hold the autopsy of my family. Next, I drove downtown to the Tulsa County Clerk office. The limestone building felt cold and imposing. I walked up to the records window and requested the original filed documents for the 50-acre ranch land my father left me. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with reading glasses, typed my name into her computer. A few minutes later, she slid a heavy manila folder across the counter. I took the folder to a quiet wooden table in the corner of the room. I opened the cover. Inside was the deed of trust securing the staggering $150,000 loan. I stared at the signature line at the bottom of the page. It was my name, written in blue ink. The loops and angles looked remarkably similar to my actual handwriting. Vanessa had practiced. She had taken her time studying old birthday cards or school documents to get the signature just right. But the forged signature was not the most damning piece of paper on the table. In the state of Oklahoma, a real estate lien requires a certified notary public to verify the identity of the person signing the document. The notary is required by law to check a driver's license or a passport. I looked at the raised seal stamped next to my fake signature. The ink revealed a name, Diane Foster. My breath caught in my throat. I read the name a second time to ensure my eyes were not playing tricks on me. Diane Foster was not a random bank employee. Diane Foster was the senior closing coordinator at my mother's real estate brokerage. The scope of the betrayal widened into a chilling picture. My mother had not just handed Vanessa the combination to the fireproof safe. My mother had actively facilitated a federal crime. She had used her own employee to rubber stamp a fraudulent loan. Barbara had leveraged her professional power to steal her own daughter's inheritance. I pulled out my phone and paid the clerk for certified copies of every single page. I slid the heavy documents into the clear sleeves of my black binder. The conspiracy was no longer a theory. It was a certified legal fact. I drove back to my small apartment and set up a command center on my kitchen table. I opened my laptop and placed the fraudulent bank statements next to the screen. My sister treated her social media accounts like a reality television show. She documented every meal, every outfit, and every high society event to prove she belonged in her wealthy fiancé's world. That vanity was going to be her downfall. I pulled up Vanessa's profile. I started matching the dates on her posts to the exact dates the stolen funds were withdrawn from the fake LLC checking account. The first match appeared in mid-February. The bank statement showed a withdrawal of $15,000 on a Tuesday. I scrolled down Vanessa's page to that exact week. There was a photo of her standing on a pedestal in an exclusive bridal boutique, holding a glass of champagne. She wore a custom silk gown covered in intricate lace. The caption read, "Said yes to the dress, spared no expense for the big day." I pressed the keyboard shortcut to capture a screenshot, ensuring the digital timestamp was visible in the corner of the image. I printed the photo and placed it in the binder right next to the bank statement. The pattern continued. On March 2nd, a withdrawal of $8,000 cleared the account. Vanessa's social media from March 3rd showed a lavish spread of imported seafood and carved meats. She had posted a video boasting about hiring the most expensive caterer in Tulsa for her reception. Another screenshot, another printed page. In early April, $12,000 vanished. Her page showed a receipt for custom imported orchids from a high-end floral designer. Hour after hour, I traced the stolen cash. Vanessa was spending my father's legacy on spun sugar and wilted petals. She was draining my future to buy applause from strangers. I documented every single transaction. I built an ironclad timeline proving identity theft, wire fraud, and civil conspiracy. I treated the betrayal exactly like a denied medical claim. I removed all emotion and focused purely on the undeniable metrics. By the evening of the third day, the black binder was 2 inches thick. It contained the certified deed, the notary logs, the fraudulent bank statements, and the social media confessions. It was a loaded weapon, waiting for the right moment to fire. I was closing the binder when my phone buzzed on the table, the screen illuminated with a text message from Vanessa. "The caterer for my bridal shower needs the final deposit tomorrow morning," Vanessa wrote. "My accounts are tied up with wedding stuff right now. I need you to cover the $2,000. Bring a cashier's check to the shower this weekend. Do not be late." I stared at the glowing text. She had stolen a small fortune from me, and yet she still had the nerve to demand more. She wanted me to pay for the privilege of watching her celebrate. In the past, a demand like this would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety. I would have skipped meals to afford it. Now, I saw it for what it truly was. It was another piece of evidence. I picked up the phone and typed a quick response. "No problem. I will bring the check." The following morning, I walked into my local bank branch. I did not write a personal check. I approached the teller window and requested a formal cashier's check made payable directly to the luxury catering company. A cashier's check requires the bank to guarantee the funds, drawing the money directly from my account and placing it in a secure ledger. More importantly, it generates a permanent tracking number. It leaves an undeniable financial footprint. If you ever need to prove exactly who paid for a service, a cashier's check is bulletproof. The teller printed the slip of paper and handed it across the counter. I looked at the bold print. $2,000. It was a painful sum to lose. That money was supposed to go toward closing costs on my future townhouse, but I viewed the expense differently now. It was not a gift to my sister. It was an investment in her destruction. I took out my phone and snapped a clear picture of the check, capturing the serial number and the payee's name. I drove home and slid the photograph into the final plastic sleeve of my black binder. I had everything I needed. The trap was fully constructed. Now I just had to play my part. I had to smile, I had to look poor, I had to let them mock my clothes and insult my bank account. I had to let Vanessa and Barbara believe their secret was safe behind their locked doors and their polished reputations. They thought I was the obedient scapegoat. They thought I would quietly absorb the debt and fade into the background while they toasted to their cleverness. They had no idea I was holding the match that would burn their fake high society lives to the ground. The bridal shower was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. I hung my cheap navy dress on the closet door, ready to walk straight into the lion's den. The Saturday afternoon sun beat down on the glass facade of an upscale downtown restaurant in Tulsa. It was one of those pretentious venues where the valet parking attendants wore crisp white gloves and the menus did not list prices because if you had to ask, you could not afford to eat there. I pulled my 10-year-old sedan into a tight parallel spot 3 blocks away to save the $20 valet fee. I walked the remaining distance, smoothing down the fabric of the simple navy dress I had worn to 3 different funerals and 2 office holiday parties. When I pushed open heavy glass doors, the cool rush of air conditioning hit my skin. The private dining room was already packed to capacity. The air smelled like expensive French perfume, crushed eucalyptus, and imported champagne. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings where white silk drapes were pinned back with crystal rosettes. Brad's family had arrived in full force. The women wore designer linen pantsuits and heavy gold jewelry that clicked whenever they gestured. The men wore tailored blazers and drank scotch before noon. They moved through the room with the effortless confidence of people who had never had to check their bank balances before buying groceries. I stood near the entryway, feeling invisible. Nobody rushed over to greet me. My mother Barbara spotted me from across the room. She wore a champagne-colored lace dress that cost a month of my rent. She gave me a brief, sharp nod, warning me with her eyes to behave. She did not want her wealthy new in-laws asking awkward questions about why her younger daughter looked like she had wandered in from a strip mall. I kept my shoulders back and walked toward an empty chair wedged near the service door out of the way of the main traffic. Vanessa was seated at the head of a long mahogany table draped in lace. She looked radiant. Her blonde hair was styled in a cascade of soft curls, and her white designer blouse caught the light of the crystal chandelier overhead. She was surrounded by towering floral arrangements that easily cost more than my entire apartment's security deposit. She was opening gifts. A professional photographer hired for the afternoon was snapping pictures of every smile, every gasp of delight, and every oversized shopping bag. I kept my head down, resting my hands quietly in my lap. I had brought the cashier receipt for the $2,000 catering deposit safely tucked inside my handbag. I had already handed the physical check to the restaurant coordinator an hour earlier to ensure the food would actually be served. Vanessa did not know I had paid it. She assumed her mother or Brad had covered it. She was too busy basking in the adoration of her new social circle to care about the logistics of her own party. The gift opening ceremony was a theatrical production designed to showcase status. Vanessa tore through designer gift wrap with practiced ease. She held up crystal decanters, silver picture frames, and cashmere throws, exclaiming how much she loved every single item. Brad's mother, Mrs. Lawson, sat in a velvet armchair to her right, nodding approvingly at each display of consumer excess. Every expensive box opened was another brick in the wall Vanessa was building to separate herself from her working-class roots. I watched the pile of luxury items grow taller. I knew exactly how every single item on that table had been purchased. I knew that beneath the imported wrapping paper and the designer logos sat the wreckage of my future. The stolen loan money had been laundered through dozens of boutique accounts to buy this exact afternoon of applause. Vanessa slowed down her pace as she reached the final few boxes on the floor. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed directly on me. A sharp gleam of malice flickered in her gaze. She knew I was sitting in the cheap seat near the service door. She knew I had brought up the rear of the gift list. "Saved the best for last," Vanessa announced loudly. Her voice carried over the ambient chatter, causing every head in the room to turn in my direction. A hush fell over the long mahogany table. The photographer shifted his heavy camera, angling the lens directly at me. I felt the weight of 50 wealthy pairs of eyes drop onto my shoulders. I did not shrink away. I kept my face smooth and neutral, practicing the emotional armor I had spent a lifetime building. Vanessa reached down and picked up a small, flat, rectangular package wrapped in brown butcher paper tied with a simple piece of twine. It was the handcrafted wooden jewelry box I had spent 3 hours sanding and oiling by hand. I could not afford a diamond tennis bracelet or a silk designer scarf. I had hoped that something personal, something made with genuine care, might bridge the gap between us. I was a fool for hoping. Vanessa held the package up by the string between her thumb and forefinger as if she were holding a dead mouse by its tail. She tilted her head and let out a light musical laugh that sounded like shattering glass. "Oh, Selena," Vanessa said, pitching her voice so every single person in the room could catch every syllable. "I know things are terribly tight for you on your little medical billing salary, but you really did not have to resort to a flea market search." A ripple of polite, uncomfortable laughter moved through the crowd. Brad's cousin whispered something to the woman beside her, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. My mother Barbara joined in the performance. She leaned forward, shaking her head with an expression of public mortification. She let out a heavy, dramatic sigh designed to earn maximum sympathy from the surrounding matrons. "You must forgive my younger daughter," Barbara said loudly, addressing Mrs. Lawson across the table. "She has always lacked an eye for quality. She simply does not understand the standards we maintain in this family. She insists on shopping in the most dreadful discount bins." Mrs. Lawson turned her gaze toward me. Her eyes were not angry. They were filled with a deep, condescending pity that felt much worse than rage. She looked at me the way a wealthy philanthropist might look at a stray dog outside a soup kitchen. She offered a tight, polite smile of dismissal before turning her attention back to the bride. The humiliation was calculated down to the second. They wanted me to flush with shame. They wanted me to stutter an apology or run out of the room in tears so they could whisper about my instability over champagne. I did not flush. I did not stutter. I gripped my glass of ice water so hard my knuckles turned white. I kept my eyes locked on Vanessa's face. I did not look down at the floor. I let the silence stretch for 3 agonizing seconds, letting the cruelty of their words hang heavy in the air. Then I smiled. It was a calm, measured smile that did not reach my eyes. "I am sorry it is not up to your standards, Vanessa," I said. My voice was clear and steady, cutting through the murmurs of the room without a tremor. "I made it by hand. I thought it might hold your trinkets." Vanessa blinked, clearly thrown off balance by my lack of tears. She had scripted a sobbing emotional breakdown, and I had handed her a polite, deadpan sentence instead. She forced a tight smile, tossed the wooden box onto the floor beside her chair without opening it, and immediately reached for the next gift box. The moment passed, but the social hierarchy of the room had been forcefully cemented. I was the poor, embarrassing sister allowed into the outer rings of high society purely as an object of charity. I sat through the remaining 20 minutes of the shower without speaking another word. I watched Vanessa stack thousands of dollars in luxury goods, knowing that every ribbon and bow was tied together with stolen debt. When the party finally began to wind down and the guests stood up to mingle and admire the floral arrangements, I slipped away toward the back hallway. I walked past the swinging doors leading into the commercial kitchen. Pinned to a corkboard beside the kitchen entrance was the restaurant coordinator's clipboard. Clipped to the front of the board was the master schedule and the itemized financial ledger for the afternoon's event. My eyes scanned the paper. I found the entry for the catering deposit. Paid in full. Cashier's check reference number matching the slip I had processed at my bank 2 days earlier. Total amount, $2,000, exact to the penny. I pulled my phone from my small handbag. I framed the clipboard in my camera lens and tapped the screen. The shutter clicked silently, capturing the high-resolution image of the receipt. I checked the preview to ensure the numbers were crystal clear. I slipped the phone back into my purse and smoothed the front of my navy dress. The trap was tightening. They were spending my stolen money while I was quietly auditing every single dollar they touched. They thought they were humiliating me at a bridal shower while I was busy gathering the final receipts for my federal lawsuit. I walked out through the side exit into the bright afternoon sun, leaving them to their champagne and their borrowed luxury. Monday morning arrived with a gray, overcast sky. I did not go to my medical billing job. I drove straight to the downtown business district parking outside a sleek glass high-rise. I rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, stepping into the reception area of the most expensive civil litigation firm in Tulsa. I did not have an appointment, but I had a cashier check for a retainer fee and a black binder that contained a prosecutor dream. A paralegal tried to turn me away, telling me to come back next week. I slid my bank envelope across the polished reception desk and told her I was hiring Marcus Davis today. Marcus Davis was not the kind of lawyer who held your hand and offered a box of tissues. He was a shark. He specialized in asset recovery, corporate fraud, and hostile family trusts. He had a reputation for tearing opposing counsel to shreds in the courtroom. People hired him when they wanted to salt the earth behind them. That was exactly what I needed. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a leather chair across from a wide mahogany desk. Davis walked in. He was in his late 50s, wearing a charcoal suit with a sharp gaze that evaluated me in 3 seconds. He sat down and folded his hands. He did not offer small talk. He asked me why I was taking up his morning. I did not offer a sad story about a broken childhood. I did not complain about the bridal shower or how my mother favored my older sibling. I reached into my bag, pulled out the thick black binder, and pushed it across the dark wood surface. "My sister stole my identity," I said, keeping my posture rigid. "She forged my signature on a deed of trust and took out a $150,000 loan secured against 50 acres of ranch land my father left me. My mother facilitated the fraud using a notary from her real estate brokerage. The funds were wired to an LLC registered at my sister's home address." Davis raised an eyebrow. Clients usually walked into his office crying. They usually brought messy emotional accusations with zero proof. I had just handed him a fully assembled puzzle. He opened the binder. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the crisp turn of plastic sleeves. I watched his eyes track across the printed credit report. He examined the forged signature on the certified deed. He paused on the notary stamp, reading Diane Foster's name and cross-referencing it with my mother's brokerage license. He flipped to the social media screenshots, comparing the timestamps on the bridal boutique photos with the withdrawal dates from the fraudulent bank account. Davis closed the binder. He leaned back in his leather chair, tapping a silver pen against his chin. He looked at me with a new level of professional respect. "Your sister committed multiple federal felonies," Davis stated, his voice flat and clinical. "We are looking at wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, and civil conspiracy. Your mother is an active participant. If we take this to the district attorney today, they will issue arrest warrants before dinner." I shook my head. A standard arrest was too easy. If we called the authorities right now, Vanessa would panic. She would drain whatever cash remained in the fake LLC. She might try to flee or hide the assets. My mother would hire a defense team to spin a story about a family misunderstanding. They would drag it out for years, claiming I agreed to the loan and just changed my mind. I would spend a decade fighting in court while my father's land went into foreclosure. "I do not want to call the police yet," I replied, leaning forward. "I do not just want my credit score fixed. I want my property secured. I want every single dollar returned to the lender so the lien is wiped clean. And I want my sister to experience the exact level of humiliation she planned for me." Davis stopped tapping his pen. He studied my face, waiting for the rest of the instructions. "She is marrying into a very prominent local family in 2 weeks," I continued. "She used this stolen money to book a country club, buy a silk gown, and hire luxury vendors. She thinks she has secured a new wealthy lifestyle. I want her entire fake reality dismantled at the exact moment she thinks she has won. I want the money gone when she needs it the most." A slow, calculated smile spread across the lawyer's face. He understood the assignment. He opened a legal pad and began writing rapidly, outlining a strategy that would trap them without firing a single warning shot. "We file a quiet civil suit for fraud," Davis explained, mapping out the timeline. "We bypass the local police and go straight to a civil judge for an emergency ex parte order. An ex parte order means we do not have to notify your sister or your mother before the hearing. We present this binder to the judge and prove that the defendants are actively dissipating stolen assets." I nodded, absorbing the legal mechanics. In my billing career, I often dealt with court orders regarding medical debt. I knew how fast a judge could act if the financial evidence was solid. Once the judge signs the order, Davis continued to reserve the bank holding the LLC account. We place a hard legal freeze on all of Vanessa's financial assets. We freeze your mother's accounts too, since she is a named co-conspirator. But we do not serve the actual lawsuit papers to them immediately. We hold the element of surprise. "When do we freeze the money?" I asked. We timed the federal asset seizure for the exact weekend of the wedding, Davis said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. High-end wedding vendors always run their final balances 24 to 48 hours before the event. When the florist, the caterer, and the country club try to process their final payments, the money will not exist. The bank will reject every single transaction. The brilliance of the plan settled over me. Vanessa would be standing at the altar of her high society dream while the financial foundation crumbled beneath her feet. She would have no access to cash. She would have no way to pay for the lavish party she had bragged about for months. The vendors would revolt. The truth would leak out to her wealthy new in-laws. "We hoist the guillotine today," Davis said, closing his notepad, "but we do not drop the blade until she is wearing white." I signed the retainer agreement right there on the mahogany desk. I authorized Davis to take total control of the civil filings. He promised to keep everything sealed, moving quietly through the court system, while my family remained completely unaware of the approaching storm. I walked out of the law firm and stepped back onto the busy Tulsa sidewalk. The gray clouds above were beginning to break, letting shafts of sunlight hit the pavement. For the first time in 6 months, I felt a deep, profound sense of control. The fear of losing my father's land had vanished. The shame of sitting in the cheap seat at the bridal shower had evaporated. I held the keys to their destruction, and all I had to do was wait for the clock to run out. The next 2 weeks required a masterclass in patience. I went back to my job, processing medical claims, answering emails, and packing cheap lunches. I continued to play the role of the defeated younger sister. I ignored the subtle insults my mother threw at me over the phone. I bit my tongue when Vanessa texted me pictures of expensive floral arrangements she was purchasing with my stolen credit. I gave them enough rope to hang themselves. But a new complication arrived just days before the rehearsal dinner. The trap was perfectly set for my sister and my mother, but there was one person involved who did not know he was walking into a disaster. Brad, the wealthy groom, reached out to me. He sent a polite text asking if I could meet him for coffee at a small cafe near my apartment. He said he needed to discuss something important about Vanessa. I stared at the message, wondering if my sister had slipped up. Brad was born into money, but he was not stupid. If he suspected something was wrong, it could derail the entire timeline. I agreed to meet him, knowing I had to protect the secret just a little bit longer. I needed to keep the groom walking toward the altar, even if it meant looking him in the eye and letting him walk straight into a nightmare. The text message from Brad arrived on a Thursday evening, exactly 14 days before the wedding. It was a simple request, asking if I had time to meet him for coffee the following morning before my shift at the hospital. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone for a long time. Brad and I rarely spoke directly. He was always polite during family dinners, but our interactions were limited to brief greetings and surface-level small talk. He lived in a world of country clubs and tailored suits, while I spent my days fighting insurance companies over unpaid medical codes. I agreed to meet him at a small independent cafe halfway between my apartment and his downtown office. I needed to know why the groom was reaching out to me behind my sister's back. The next morning, I walked into the coffee shop wearing my standard work uniform of dark slacks and a plain blouse. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and burnt toast. Brad was already sitting in a corner booth. He looked entirely out of place on the worn vinyl seat. He wore a crisp, light blue dress shirt and a silver watch that probably cost more than my annual salary. Brad inherited 3 highly successful car dealerships from his grandfather. He grew up with trust funds and private schools. He was a decent man, but he possessed that specific kind of naive optimism that only comes from never having to worry about paying rent. He viewed money as a universal tool that could fix any uncomfortable situation. I slid into the booth across from him. He had already ordered a black coffee for me. He offered a warm, friendly smile, but his shoulders were tense. He drummed his fingers against the table. "Thank you for meeting me, Selena," Brad said, keeping his voice low. "I know you have to get to the hospital soon, so I will not take up much of your time." "Is everything okay with the wedding?" I asked, playing the role of the uninformed younger sibling. "Everything is fine with the wedding," Brad replied, shifting in his seat. "The vendors are booked, the venue is ready, but I wanted to talk to you about the family dynamic. I noticed how tense things were at the bridal shower last weekend. I saw the way your mother and Vanessa spoke to you." I kept my face perfectly neutral. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the bitter liquid burn the back of my throat. I waited for him to continue. Brad reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a crisp white envelope and placed it on the table between us. He pressed his fingertips against the paper and slowly pushed it across the wood surface until it touched my hand. I looked down at the envelope. I did not pick it up. Vanessa told me everything Brad said, his tone softening with genuine pity. She told me how much you were struggling right now. My heart skipped a single beat. For a fraction of a second, I thought Vanessa had confessed. I thought she had cracked under the pressure and admitted to the stolen identity and the fraudulent loan. But as I looked into Brad's earnest, sympathetic eyes, I realized he did not look like a man who had just discovered his fiancée was a federal criminal. He looked like a man who thought he was rescuing a drowning victim. "What exactly did Vanessa tell you?" I asked, keeping my breathing steady. "She told me about your debt," Brad explained, leaning forward. "She said you have been drowning in credit card bills for years. She told me you are deeply bitter because you cannot afford nice things, and that is why you act so cold toward her. She said she tried to help you financially in the past, but your pride always gets in the way." The sheer sociopathy of my sister washed over me like a bucket of ice water. Vanessa had not just stolen $150,000 from me. She had not just forged my signature and put a lien on my father's land. She had launched a preemptive strike against my character. She knew that eventually the financial truth might surface. She knew the bank might call the house, or a collection notice might accidentally reach the wrong mailbox. To protect her lie, she had planted a seed in Brad's mind. She had painted me as a jealous, financially irresponsible loser. If I ever tried to warn him or complain about missing money, Brad would simply dismiss it as the desperate lies of a broke sister trying to ruin a beautiful wedding. Vanessa had crafted the perfect shield, and she was using Brad's good nature to hold it in place. "Take the envelope," Selena, Brad urged, gently tapping the white paper. "There is a check for $5,000 inside. It is from my personal account. Vanessa does not know I am doing this. Use it to pay off some of your high-interest debt. Buy a beautiful dress for the ceremony. Get your hair and makeup done. Let us just clear the air and keep the peace for the wedding day. I want you to feel like you belong there." I looked at the envelope. $5,000 was a staggering amount of money to hand out over a morning coffee. To Brad, it was pocket change. To him, it was the cost of purchasing a stress-free wedding weekend. He genuinely believed he was doing a good deed. He thought he was healing a fractured family. He had no idea he was marrying a parasite. He had no idea the woman sleeping next to him had funded her entire bridal aesthetic by hijacking my identity. The urge to rip the envelope open and tear the check into tiny pieces and scream the truth filled my chest. I wanted to grab him by the collar of his expensive shirt and tell him about the black binder sitting on my lawyer's mahogany desk. I wanted to tell him that his perfect society bride was going to be served with a federal asset freeze in exactly 14 days. But my medical billing training anchored me to the present moment. In my profession, you do not act on emotion. You stick to the procedure. Attorney Davis had been very clear during our meeting. We had to maintain absolute secrecy. If I told Brad the truth right now, he would confront Vanessa today. He would cancel the wedding immediately. The surprise would be ruined. Vanessa would have time to access the fake LLC account and drain the remaining stolen funds before the judge signed the legal freeze. She might wire the cash to an offshore account or hide it in untraceable assets. My father's land would be lost forever because I could not control my temper in a coffee shop. I had to protect the legal strategy. I had to let Brad remain in the dark for just a little longer. I reached out and placed my hand flat over the white envelope. I slid it back across the table, stopping right in front of his coffee cup. "I do not need your money, Brad," I said. My voice was calm, quiet, and devoid of any anger. Brad frowned, clearly confused by my refusal. "Selena, please, do not let your pride ruin this. I am trying to help you." "I know you are trying to help," I replied, looking directly into his eyes. "You are a good man, Brad. You want to fix things, but Vanessa lied to you. I do not have any credit card debt. I have never asked her for a single dime." Brad shook his head, a defensive posture creeping into his shoulders. "Why would she lie about something like that? She was crying when she told me how worried she was about your future." "Because she needs you to think I am unstable," I said. "She needs you to believe I am a jealous failure, so you will not listen to me if I ever try to warn you." Warn me about what? Brad asked, his brow furrowing. The sympathetic rescuer routine was fading, replaced by a deep, unsettling confusion. I picked up my purse and stood up from the vinyl booth. I looked down at the wealthy heir who was about to legally bind himself to a criminal. I felt a brief flash of sorrow for him. He was a pawn in her game, just like I had been, but he needed to discover the truth on his own terms. You should really check Vanessa's credit report before you sign that marriage license, I said, keeping my tone even and clinical. Brad opened his mouth to speak, but the words failed him. He stared at me, his mind struggling to process the sudden shift in the conversation. He had walked into the cafe expecting to buy my gratitude. Instead, I had just handed him a heavy, silent bomb. Do not take my word for it, I added, turning toward the exit. Just run her financial background. Have a great day, Brad. I walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful note as I stepped onto the pavement. I left him sitting in the corner booth with his untouched $5,000 check and a seed of profound doubt planted firmly in his mind. I did not know if Brad would actually pull her credit report. I did not know if he had the courage to dig into the finances of the woman he loved. But I had done my part. I had given him the map. Whether he chose to open his eyes or keep them closed was no longer my responsibility. The timeline was accelerating. The trap was locked, and the countdown had officially begun. I drove to the hospital and clocked into my shift focusing on claim denials and patient charts. Every passing hour brought us closer to the rehearsal dinner. My mother and sister were busy confirming floral deliveries and finalizing seating charts, entirely blind to the invisible net tightening around their throats. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought I was sitting at home wallowing in my poverty while they prepared for the event of the season. They were about to learn that the quietest person in the room is always the most dangerous. Friday evening arrived carrying the humid weight of a looming Oklahoma storm. The rehearsal dinner took place at a premier steakhouse in downtown Tulsa. This was a restaurant where waiters wore crisp black ties and swept breadcrumbs off the linen tablecloths with small silver brushes. I walked inside wearing the same pair of dark slacks I wore to the coffee shop with Brad. The hostess guided our party to a private dining room in the back. The space smelled of aged beef, roasted garlic, and expensive red wine. I did not get a seat near the bride or the groom. My mother, Barbara, orchestrated the seating chart with surgical precision. She placed herself at the center of the long table, right next to Brad's wealthy parents. She assigned me to the very last chair at the far end of the room. My seat was pushed up against the swinging wooden doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter rushed out carrying heavy trays of sizzling meat, a blast of hot, greasy air hit the back of my neck. I was physically present, but socially exiled. I sat quietly, sipping a glass of tap water. I watched the family dynamics unfold from my corner. Brad sat beside Vanessa, looking sharp in a tailored navy suit, but his posture was unusually stiff. He did not possess the relaxed, glowing demeanor of a man getting married in less than 24 hours. He kept glancing down at his phone. He turned his water glass in slow circles. The conversation we had at the cafe was clearly working its way through his mind. I could see the subtle tension in his jaw whenever Vanessa leaned in to whisper something in his ear. The waiter poured expensive Cabernet into crystal glasses. Once the main courses were cleared away, Barbara stood up and tapped a silver spoon against the rim of her wine glass. The room fell silent. Brad's relatives turned their attention to the mother of the bride. Barbara offered a warm, tearful smile. She looked like a proud matriarch. "I just want to say a few words about my beautiful daughter, Barbara," began her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "Raising Vanessa has been the greatest joy of my life. She has always been so driven, so focused on her goals. Everything she has today, she built entirely on her own. She works tirelessly to create a beautiful life. Seeing her marry a wonderful man like Brad feels like the perfect reward for all her independent hard work." The sheer hypocrisy of the speech twisted in my gut. Barbara was standing in a room full of millionaires praising her daughter for building an independent life. She conveniently omitted the part where they forged my signature to steal my inheritance. She left out the fact that Vanessa's successful life was currently funded by a fraudulent loan secured against my father's ranch land. Brad's parents smiled and raised their glasses, buying every single word of the lie. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I did not roll my eyes. I did not scoff. I let the charade play out. Vanessa stood up next to deliver her own toast. She wore a white designer cocktail dress that hugged her frame perfectly. She raised her champagne flute, holding it high enough to catch the light from the overhead chandelier. She thanked Brad's parents for welcoming her into their prestigious family. She thanked her mother for being her constant rock. Then, Vanessa's gaze drifted down the long table. Her eyes locked directly onto me, sitting in the shadows near the kitchen doors. A familiar, cruel spark ignited in her expression. She could not resist the urge to twist the knife. She needed to put me down in front of her new wealthy in-laws to elevate her own status. "I also want to thank my younger sister Selena," Vanessa said, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive sweetness. "I know it is hard for some people to leave the past behind. I know it can be difficult to watch someone else succeed when you are struggling to find your own way. Jealousy can really ruin family bonds if you let it, but I am choosing to focus on gratitude tonight." Underneath the heavy linen tablecloth, I slipped my hand into my purse. I pulled out my phone and unlocked the screen using my thumbprint. I opened the voice memo application. My medical billing career taught me that verbal promises mean nothing without a recording. I rested the phone on my lap and tapped the red circular button. The digital timer started ticking, counting the seconds. Vanessa took a sip of her champagne and continued her speech, unaware that every word was being captured. "Brad and I wanted this weekend to be flawless," Vanessa boasted, her voice ringing out across the quiet dining room. "People kept telling me to stick to a budget, but I refused. I spared no expense for tomorrow. The country club, the imported white orchids, the custom silk gown. I wanted a wedding that matched my bank account. I wanted a celebration that proved exactly who I am and what I have achieved. I paid for the absolute best because I deserve the best." I looked down at the digital timer on my screen. It crossed the 1-minute mark. I had just recorded a crystal-clear audio confession. Vanessa had publicly claimed ownership of the extravagant spending. She had explicitly stated that she was the one paying for the luxury vendors, using funds she claimed were sitting in her own bank account. She had just provided the exact legal evidence my lawyer needed. She proved she was actively spending the stolen funds in real time. I glanced over at Brad. He was not smiling. While his parents clapped politely at Vanessa's speech, Brad kept his hands resting on the table. He looked at his bride with a guarded expression. The seed of doubt I planted in the coffee shop was taking root. He was watching her brag about a bank account that I told him did not exist. He was processing the math. The tension radiating from his side of the table was palpable. The rehearsal dinner concluded an hour later. The guests stood up, exchanging hugs and kissing cheeks, promising to see each other at the ceremony. I slipped out through the side exit, avoiding the fake pleasantries. I walked 2 blocks down the dark street until I reached my old parked sedan. I got into the driver's seat and locked the doors. The quiet isolation of the car felt like a sanctuary after enduring 2 hours of their toxic performance. I pulled my phone from my purse and stopped the voice recording. I played the file back, holding the speaker close to my ear. Vanessa's arrogant bragging echoed in the small cabin of my car. The audio quality was perfect. I opened my email application and attached the sound file to a new message. I typed a brief note to Marcus Davis, my civil litigation attorney. "Audio confession from the rehearsal dinner," I wrote. "She admits to spending the funds and claims the money is hers." I hit send. I watched the progress bar slide across the screen until the email disappeared into the digital ether. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated in the cup holder. Davis was working late. "Received," Davis replied in a short text message. "This is the final nail in the coffin. I am sending this directly to the judge tonight." I typed a single question in response. "Are we still on schedule?" Davis replied immediately. "The legal freeze is authorized for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The bank will lock the LLC accounts before she even puts on her makeup. Get some sleep, Selena. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day for your sister." I set the phone down and rested my head against the steering wheel. A deep, steadying breath filled my lungs. The silent preparation was over. The forensic audit, the secret recordings, the quiet endurance of their daily insults, it had all led to this specific moment. I had played the role of the poor, helpless sister perfectly. I let them push me into the corner near the kitchen doors. I let them mock my clothes and my career. I let them build their entire future on a foundation of stolen money. Now the foundation was rigged to blow. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb. The Tulsa skyline glowed in the rearview mirror as I drove back to my modest apartment. I did not feel any guilt. I did not feel any hesitation. True love means protecting the people who care about you. It does not mean allowing parasites to drain your life savings just to keep up appearances. When I unlocked my front door, the apartment was quiet and dark. I hung my keys on the wall hook and walked into my bedroom. I took out the cheap navy shift dress I planned to wear to the wedding and hung it on the closet door. I set my alarm for 6 in the morning. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. For the first time in 6 months, I did not worry about the bank foreclosing on my father's land. I did not worry about my ruined credit score. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, knowing that when the sun came up, my sister was going to lose everything. Saturday morning broke with bright, clear sunlight streaming through the cheap blinds of my apartment. I woke up long before my alarm sounded. My mind was sharp and alert. I walked into the small kitchen and started brewing a pot of generic coffee. The machine sputtered and hissed, filling the room with a familiar, bitter scent. I did not feel any anxiety about the day ahead. I felt the steady calm of a hunter waiting in a blind. My phone chimed, resting on the laminate countertop. I picked up the device. A single text message glowed on the screen. It was from Marcus Davis. Accounts frozen, warrants signed. Those 4 words carried the weight of my entire future. The legal machinery we had set into motion was now unstoppable. The trap had snapped shut. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the dark liquid warm my chest. I walked into my bedroom and pulled the navy shift dress from its hanger. I slipped it over my head, smoothing the familiar fabric down my sides. The dress was plain. It lacked sequins, lace, or any designer labels. My mother and sister viewed this garment as a symbol of my failure. Today, I wore it as armor. I grabbed my purse and drove my dented sedan toward the most exclusive property in Tulsa. The country club sat behind towering iron gates guarded by men in sharp uniforms. I rolled down my window and gave my name. The guard checked a laminated list, nodded, and waved me through. I parked in the far back lot, avoiding the valet stand. The manicured lawn stretched out like green velvet under the morning sun. White folding chairs were arranged in perfect rows on the grass, awaiting the afternoon ceremony. I walked through the grand double doors of the clubhouse. The air inside hummed with frantic energy. Waitstaff rushed down the carpeted corridors, carrying stacks of china and polished silverware. I followed the signs pointing toward the bridal suite. As I approached the heavy mahogany doors leading into the dressing area, I noticed the wedding planner. She was a thin woman, wearing a strict black suit and a wireless headset. She paced back and forth in the hallway. Her fingers tapped rapidly against the glass screen of a digital tablet. She chewed her bottom lip, her brow furrowed in deep distress. She looked like a woman watching a slow-motion car crash. I bypassed her and pushed the door open. The bridal suite smelled overwhelmingly of aerosol hairspray setting powder and chilled Prosecco. 4 makeup artists hovered around Vanessa. My sister sat in a high chair wearing a silk robe embroidered with the word bride in silver thread. She tilted her chin, inspecting her reflection in a lighted vanity mirror. She looked beautiful, and she looked impossibly smug. Barbara stood near a rack of bridesmaid dresses holding a glass of sparkling wine. My mother wore her tailored silver gown, her hair sprayed into a rigid helmet of blonde waves. She spotted me walking into the room. Her eyes immediately dropped to my plain navy dress. Her lips thinned into a tight line of disapproval. She set her drink on a side table and marched over to intercept me before I could get too close to the bride. Barbara grabbed my elbow and steered me toward a quiet alcove near the bathroom, away from the buzzing stylists. Her grip was tight, her fingernails digging into my skin. "We need to have a quick talk, Selena," my mother whispered, her tone sharp and patronizing. "The professional photographers arriving in 10 minutes to take the pre-wedding family portraits. I have decided to cut you from this session." I looked at her, keeping my expression carefully blank. I let her continue her justification. "Your dress just does not fit the color palette, sweetie," Barbara said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle on my shoulder. "Vanessa wants these pictures submitted to bridal magazines. The aesthetic has to be flawless. You understand. We cannot have a cheap department store outfit ruining the visual flow of the album. You can just wait outside until the ceremony begins." She expected me to look hurt. She expected my eyes to fill with tears and my shoulders to slump in defeat. This was her final attempt to put me in my place before the glorious high society event kicked off. She wanted to remind me that I was a peasant, allowed inside the castle only by her grace. I looked into my mother's cold, calculating eyes. A genuine warm smile spread across my face. It was the first real smile I had given her in 6 months. "I completely understand, Mom," I replied. My voice was light and cheerful. Barbara frowned, taking a half-step back. My pleasant reaction unsettled her. She was used to my quiet suffering, not my cheerful compliance. She searched my face for sarcasm, but found none. I genuinely did not care about the photographs, because I knew those pictures would never be printed in any magazine. I knew this wedding album was going to become evidence in a federal fraud trial. I turned around and walked out of the suite, stepping back into the quiet hallway. The heavy door clicked shut behind me. The wedding planner was still pacing, her panic now visibly escalating. She pressed a hand to her earpiece, listening intently to someone on the other end of the radio line. She let out a sharp, frustrated breath and marched toward the bridal suite doors. I stepped back into the shadows near a decorative marble column, making myself invisible. The planner pushed the door open just wide enough to stick her head inside. She caught Vanessa's attention and gestured urgently for her to step out. A moment later, my sister appeared in the hallway. Vanessa scowled, clearly annoyed at the interruption. She held the edges of her silk robe together, her makeup perfectly contoured. "What is the problem?" Vanessa asked, her voice dripping with impatience. "I am in the middle of getting my lashes applied." The planner lowered her voice to a frantic whisper. "Vanessa, the final wire transfer for the florist just bounced. The bank rejected the routing number, and the venue coordinator just radioed me. They tried to run your primary card for the catering balance, and it declined. We need a new payment method immediately, or they are going to pull the staff." Vanessa's annoyed expression did not falter. She did not look scared. She rolled her eyes and let out an arrogant sigh. "It is just a bank fraud alert," Vanessa said, waving her hand dismissively. "I have been spending so much money this week, the bank probably flagged the account for unusual activity. Just run the card again later. It will clear. I am marrying Brad. Do they really think I cannot afford some flowers?" Vanessa turned on her heel and strutted back into the bridal suite, letting the door slam in the planner's face. The planner stared at the closed mahogany wood, her mouth slightly open. She looked down at her tablet, the red declined notifications glaring on the screen. She rubbed her temples, muttering something under her breath, before lifting her radio to deliver the bad news to the catering director. I stood behind the marble column listening to the beautiful sound of collapsing lies. Vanessa truly believed her own fiction. She was so consumed by her vanity, she assumed the financial delay was just a minor inconvenience caused by her staggering wealth. She thought the system was protecting her riches. She had no idea the system was locking her in a cage. The bank was not issuing a temporary security alert. The bank had sealed the vault shut. Marcus Davis had executed the freeze perfectly. Every single account connected to my sister's name and that fraudulent LLC was currently locked down by a federal judge. There was no money to run again later. The $150,000 she stole from my future was frozen suspended in a legal holding pattern. The vendors were essentially working for free, and they were about to realize it. I walked down the corridor toward the outdoor patio. The warm Oklahoma breeze rustled the leaves of the oak trees surrounding the property. Guests were beginning to arrive. Valets were parking imported sports cars and luxury sedans. Women in pastel dresses and men in seersucker suits mingled on the terrace drinking pre-ceremony cocktails. They were all gathering to witness the union of two prominent families. I found a quiet bench near a stone fountain and sat down. I smoothed the skirt of my cheap navy dress. My mother thought she had banished me to the shadows to protect her image. She did not realize she had given me the best seat in the house to watch her empire burn. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in exactly 1 hour. The tension behind the scenes was boiling, and it was only a matter of time before the lid blew off. I checked my phone one last time, reading the text from my lawyer again. Warrants signed. I put the device back in my purse. I leaned back against the wooden bench and listened to the water trickling in the fountain. The music was about to stop, and my sister was about to face the loudest silence of her life. The string quartet began playing a classical melody, signaling the start of the ceremony. I joined the crowd of wealthy guests moving toward the manicured lawn. The rows of white folding chairs were rapidly filling, with people wearing expensive pastel fabrics and designer sunglasses. I bypassed the front sections reserved for immediate family and close friends. I walked straight to the very last row and took an empty seat on the edge of the aisle. I preferred the cheap seats today. From the back, I possessed a perfect vantage point to watch the entire performance unfold. The music swelled. The attendees stood up. Vanessa appeared at the top of the stone pathway. My sister looked like a conquering queen. The custom silk gown trailed behind her, gliding over the pristine green grass. Her blonde hair caught the afternoon sunlight shining under a delicate lace veil. She held a bouquet of rare imported white orchids. She walked with a slow, measured cadence, soaking in the admiration of 200 pairs of eyes. She stared straight ahead, locking her gaze on Brad, waiting at the altar. She radiated triumph. She believed she had successfully crossed the finish line. She thought her forged signatures and stolen funds had bought her a permanent ticket into high society. I shifted my attention to the groom. Brad stood beneath a floral archway looking sharp in his tailored navy suit, but his posture betrayed his nerves. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. When Vanessa reached his side, he offered a tight smile. It lacked the genuine warmth I had seen from him in the past. The conversation we shared at the coffee shop was still gnawing at the back of his mind. He was a man trying to convince himself he was making the right choice. The officiant began speaking, delivering a rehearsed speech about trust, honesty, and building a foundation together. The irony of those words hung heavy in the warm Oklahoma air. When it was time for the vows, Vanessa spoke in a loud, clear voice. She promised to love Brad for richer or for poorer. She delivered the line without a single trace of guilt. She was promising to endure poverty while actively standing on a mountain of my stolen debt. When it was Brad's turn, he hesitated. The pause lasted only 2 seconds, but in a silent crowd, 2 seconds feels like a lifetime. He cleared his throat, looked down at Vanessa's hands, and recited his lines. He pushed the seed of doubt down and chose the comfortable path. He said, "I do." The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. The crowd erupted into applause. Brad and Vanessa kissed and turned to face their audience. They walked back up the aisle together. Vanessa beamed, waving at Brad's affluent relatives. She passed right by my row without even glancing in my direction. She had secured the ring. She thought she was untouchable. The guests began filtering away from the lawn, heading toward the stone terrace for the cocktail hour. I stayed in my seat for a few extra minutes, letting the crowd disperse. I watched the staff carry away the folding chairs. I stood up and smoothed the skirt of my navy dress. The ceremony was over, but the real show was just beginning. I walked back toward the main clubhouse, taking a side path that led near the service entrances. The air conditioning hit my skin as I stepped through a set of glass doors. I rounded the corner, approaching the grand hallway that connected the cocktail terrace to the main ballroom. The atmosphere in the corridor felt like a pressure cooker. I stopped behind a decorative marble pillar, blending into the shadows. 10 feet away, near the heavy oak doors of the reception hall, a heated confrontation was taking place. The catering manager, a tall man holding a thick clipboard, stood blocking the entrance. Beside him stood the band leader, a stocky guy wearing a black tuxedo jacket with his arms crossed tight across his chest. They were cornering my mother. Barbara looked frantic. Her polite society smile was gone, replaced by a panicked scowl. She clutched her expensive designer purse against her silver dress like a shield. She glanced nervously over her shoulder, checking to see if any of Brad's relatives were walking down the hallway. "You need to lower your voices," Barbara hissed, pointing a trembling finger at the catering manager. "We have 200 prominent guests drinking champagne right now. You are going to open these doors and start serving the appetizers." "I am not serving a single piece of food until the final balance is settled," the catering manager replied. His tone was professional but firm. "The wire transfer your daughter authorized this morning bounced. The bank rejected the routing number. The secondary card declined. I have a staff of 30 people working back there and food costs that run into the thousands. We do not work for free." The band leader stepped forward, backing up the caterer. "My crew is supposed to take the stage in 20 minutes, he added. "We have not received our final check. We are packing up the instruments right now unless somebody produces a valid payment." Barbara let out a sharp breath of indignation. She drew herself up to her full height, trying to use her arrogant posture to intimidate the working men. "Do you have any idea who we are?" Barbara demanded, her voice rising. "Do you know who my new son-in-law is? The Lawson family has been keeping this country club in business for 3 generations. This is a simple banking error. My daughter has been spending a fortune this week, and her bank flagged the account for security reasons. It happens to wealthy people all the time." The catering manager did not flinch. He tapped his pen against his clipboard. "I do not care if she is the governor," he stated. "Our contract clearly states that services will not be rendered if the final payment does not clear prior to the reception. Open a new tab, or we go home." Barbara ground her teeth together. She was trapped. She could not let the vendors walk out. If the ballroom doors remained locked and the food was not served, Brad's parents would demand an explanation. The wealthy guests would realize the bride could not afford her own party. The carefully constructed illusion of our high society family would shatter before the first dance. "Fine," Barbara snapped, unzipping her leather purse. "It is just a temporary glitch. I will put the remaining balances on my personal card. You can run it right now. Vanessa will reimburse me on Monday when her bank lifts the security hold." I watched from the shadows, my pulse maintaining a slow, steady rhythm. Barbara pulled a sleek platinum credit card from her wallet. She handed it to the catering manager with a look of supreme disdain. She believed she was the hero saving the day. She believed her own finances were secure. She had no idea she was a named co-conspirator in a federal fraud lawsuit. She had no idea Marcus Davis had included her accounts in the emergency ex parte order. The judge had frozen her assets at the exact same moment Vanessa's accounts were locked. My mother's platinum card was currently a useless piece of plastic. The catering manager pulled a mobile card reader from his apron pocket. He typed the heavy final balance onto the digital screen. He slid the platinum card into the chip reader. The machine beeped. A small yellow circle spun on the screen, processing the transaction. Barbara tapped her high heel against the carpet, waiting for the green check mark of approval. She already had her hand out, ready to snatch the card back. The machine let out a harsh double beep. The screen flashed bright red. "Declined," the catering manager said, looking up at her. Barbara's face dropped. The arrogant scowl vanished, replaced by sheer, utter confusion. She reached out and snatched the card from the machine, wiping the chip against her silver dress. "That is impossible," Barbara insisted, her voice cracking. "Run it again. Your machine must be broken. I have an incredible credit limit on that account. I just paid the balance last week. Run it again." The manager sighed, wiped the screen, and inserted the card a second time. The yellow circle spun. The machine issued the same harsh double beep. The screen flashed red. "Declined," he repeated, handing the card back. "Do you have another form of payment, ma'am?" Barbara stared at the piece of plastic in her hand like it had just bitten her. Her chest heaved as she drew in shallow, frantic breaths. She dug into her purse, pulling out a different credit card from a different bank. She shoved it toward the manager. "Try this one," she ordered, panic lacing her words. The manager swiped the second card. The screen turned red. "Declined." A deep, heavy silence fell over the corridor. The catering manager and the band leader exchanged a knowing glance. They had both worked in the luxury event industry long enough to recognize the signs of a fraudulent client. The money was gone. I stood behind the marble pillar, watching my mother experience the exact terror she had forced upon me. She had told me to sit quietly and absorb the destruction of my credit score. She had told me to let the bank foreclose on my father's land so she could protect her image. Now she was staring at the reality of a frozen bank account. She was staring at a debt she could not pay. "I will write you a check," Barbara stammered, her hands shaking as she reached for her purse again. "No checks," the catering manager replied, crossing his arms. "Cash or a cleared card. That is the policy." A loud burst of laughter echoed from the far end of the hall. The cocktail hour was ending. The wealthy attendees were beginning to filter away from the terrace, making their way toward the grand reception hall. They were expecting a lavish multi-course dinner. They were expecting a live band and flowing champagne. They had no idea they were walking into an unfunded crime scene. Barbara heard the approaching footsteps. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale and desperate. She looked at the heavy oak doors of the ballroom and then back at the stern faces of the unpaid vendors. The dominoes were wobbling, threatening to collapse at any second. I leaned against the cool stone of the pillar, waiting for the final push. The wealthy attendees did not notice the panic radiating from the event staff. They flooded past the heavy oak doors and spilled into the grand reception hall. The venue was a masterclass in expensive aesthetics. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over tables draped in imported silk linens. Towering centerpieces of rare white orchids stretched toward the ceiling, casting long, elegant shadows across the room. A massive custom ice sculpture shaped like a pair of swans sat near the dessert bar, slowly melting under the bright lights. The string quartet had been replaced by a 12-piece live band situated on a raised mahogany stage. The musicians played a smooth jazz melody, setting a sophisticated tone for the evening. Mr. and Mrs. Lawson Brad's parents sat at the prominent VIP table near the dance floor. They clinked their champagne flutes together, chatting amiably with the city elite. They believed they were hosting the wedding of the season. They thought their new daughter-in-law came from a respectable, established family. They had no idea the entire luxurious production was an unfunded mirage. Barbara had somehow convinced the catering manager to grant her a brief grace period. She must have begged for 30 minutes, promising to contact her bank and clear the security hold on her platinum card. The staff agreed to let the guests enter the room, and they poured the first round of drinks, but the kitchen doors remained firmly shut. No actual food was leaving the staging area. The waiters stood near the walls with stiff postures, their eyes darting toward the exits. The underlying tension among the workers was thick enough to cut with a knife. I found a quiet spot near the side exit doors. I held a glass of ice water and watched the illusion strain under its own weight. My medical billing background trained me to spot the subtle signs of a failing system. When an insurance claim is denied, the rejection codes start piling up until the entire account freezes. I was watching my sister's life experience a total systemic rejection. Vanessa entered the ballroom to a standing ovation. Brad held her hand, but his grip looked rigid. They walked onto the monogrammed dance floor, taking their designated places at the head table. The bride should have looked relaxed. She had secured the wealthy husband. She had the captive audience she always craved, but I could see the cracks forming in her foundation. Vanessa's chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. Her eyes flicked toward the kitchen doors, noticing the distinct lack of appetizers. She caught sight of Barbara standing near the bar. Our mother was desperately scrolling through her cell phone, her face pale and drawn. Vanessa knew the credit cards had declined. She knew something was fundamentally wrong with her stolen funds. The panic was clawing at her throat. A narcissist cannot handle the feeling of losing control. When their reality begins to fracture, they seek out a safe target to project their anxiety onto. They need to crush someone else to restore their own sense of superiority. Vanessa scanned the crowded room and found her target. She spotted me standing in the shadows. She handed her champagne flute to Brad without saying a single word. She lifted the heavy skirt of her custom silk gown and marched across the ballroom floor. Her heels struck the polished wood with a sharp, rhythmic intensity. She did not care that her new-in-laws were watching her abandon the head table. She needed a punching bag, and I was the only person in the room she felt entitled to abuse. I gripped my water glass, feeling the icy condensation numb my fingers. I watched her approach. 6 months of silent preparation, 30 days of gathering evidence, and $150,000 of stolen debt stood between us. Vanessa stopped 2 feet away. She did not offer a polite greeting. She did not pretend to be a happy bride. Her face twisted into a snarl she usually reserved for closed doors. "You are too poor to be family," Vanessa hissed. Her voice was a razor wrapped in velvet, pitched low enough to avoid the attention of the nearby tables. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my chest. The heavy diamond on her left hand caught the light from the chandeliers, flashing a brilliant warning. "Sit quietly and do not embarrass us today," she commanded, her tone dripping with venom. Before I could even process the sheer audacity of her statement, Barbara appeared right beside her. My mother had abandoned her frantic phone calls to join the ambush. She smoothed the front of her silver dress, trying to project an air of calm authority. She ignored the unpaid vendors standing 10 feet away. She ignored the financial ruin breathing down her neck. Her priority was ensuring I knew my place in the dirt. "Your sister is right," Selena Barbara said, adjusting her diamond earring. "Know your place. You do not fit the aesthetic here. Brad's family is very prominent. Just stay out of the professional photos and try not to talk to anyone important." I stood there, letting their insults wash over me. A profound sense of clarity settled into my bones. This was the ultimate confirmation. I had spent weeks wondering if the trap I built was too harsh. I wondered if destroying their public reputation was a step too far. But standing in that ballroom, listening to them degrade me while they actively spent my stolen inheritance, erased every ounce of doubt. They were standing on the brink of ruin. They were surrounded by angry vendors and locked bank accounts. Yet even in the face of their own destruction, they could not stop treating me like an afterthought. They looked at me and saw nothing but a convenient credit score. They needed me to be worthless so they could feel valuable. I did not argue with them. I did not raise my voice to match their cruelty. I did not demand an apology or threaten to expose the fraud. The time for talking had passed weeks ago. I looked at Vanessa, taking in her flawless makeup and her expensive gown. I looked at Barbara, noting the desperate edge in her eyes. I smiled. It was a calm, hollow smile that offered them zero comfort and zero submission. I set my water glass on a passing waiter's silver tray. I turned my back on the bride and the mother of the bride. I walked toward the side exit. I pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped into the quiet hallway. The thick wood fell shut behind me, instantly muting the loud bass of the live band. The corridor was empty except for a single venue security guard standing near the main entrance. I reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out my cell phone. My fingers were steady. My heart beat in a slow, measured rhythm. I dialed the direct line to Marcus Davis. He answered on the first ring. "Are we ready?" Davis asked, his voice crisp and professional over the cellular connection. "I am standing outside the ballroom," I replied. "She is about to take the floor for her speech." "The process server is waiting in the lobby with the venue coordinator," Davis informed me. "They just needed the green light from you." I looked through the tall glass partition that separated the hallway from the reception room. I watched Vanessa march back to the head table. She looked energized by our interaction. Belittling me had given her a false sense of control. She believed she had reestablished the family hierarchy. She thought her world was secure and her secrets were safe. "Serve her now," I commanded. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my purse. I stood near the glass panel, holding my breath, waiting for the sequence to initiate. Inside the ballroom, Vanessa picked up a wireless microphone. She stood in the center of the monogrammed dance floor. The bright overhead spotlight tracked her movements, illuminating the intricate lace of her dress. She smiled at the crowd, projecting the image of a wealthy, carefree heiress. She raised her free hand, signaling the band to lower their volume so she could deliver her grand toast. Brad stood a few feet away watching her. He did not look enamored. He looked like a man waiting for a heavy shoe to drop. Vanessa brought the microphone toward her lips. She opened her mouth to speak about her perfect new life and the bright future ahead of her. The music did not just fade, it stopped dead. The sudden absence of sound was jarring. The heavy bass notes vanished, leaving a vast vacuum in the room. The transition was entirely unnatural. The 12-piece band lowered their instruments simultaneously. The venue security guard had received the signal from the front desk. The event coordinator had instructed the musicians to cease playing immediately due to the severe legal situation unfolding in the lobby. The silence that washed over the ballroom was deafening. 200 guests stopped talking. The clinking of silverware against fine china ceased. Every single person in the room turned their attention toward the dance floor, expecting a technical difficulty or a surprise announcement. Vanessa stood frozen in the bright spotlight. Her confident smile faltered, slipping down her face. She tapped the side of the microphone, thinking the sound system had malfunctioned. She looked over her shoulder at the bandleader, but the man simply stared back at her, his arms crossed firmly over his tuxedo jacket. He knew her accounts were frozen and he was done playing her tune. The heavy wooden doors at the front of the ballroom began to open. The brass hinges creaked, echoing across the silent room. The illusion was over. The guillotine had finally dropped. The sudden absence of the jazz band left a ringing silence in the reception hall. The brass hinges of the main entrance groaned under the weight of the heavy oak doors. Two venue security guards stepped through the frame. Between them walked a man wearing a rumpled gray suit. He did not belong in a room filled with imported silk and crystal chandeliers. His shoes were scuffed. His tie hung slightly off-center. He carried a thick manila envelope tucked tightly under his left arm. He moved with the grim, steady purpose of a man executing a strict legal mandate. The crowd of wealthy socialites parted to let him pass. Women in pastel dresses pulled their skirts back. Men in tailored tuxedos stepped aside, murmuring confused questions to their tablemates. The process server ignored them all. He ignored the towering white orchids. He ignored the custom ice sculpture melting near the dessert bar. His gaze remained locked onto the bride standing in the center of the spotlight. Vanessa watched him approach. She stood on the monogram dance floor, her custom lace gown glowing under the overhead beams. She did not recognize the danger walking toward her. A lifetime of getting her way and treating me like a disposable resource had blinded her to the concept of consequences. She tightened her grip on the wireless microphone, adjusting her posture to project confidence. A polite, confused smile formed on her lips. She assumed this was a theatrical interruption planned by the groom's family. She thought Brad had hired a messenger to deliver a surprise wedding gift, perhaps a set of plane tickets for a luxury honeymoon, or a telegram from a distant rich relative who could not attend. She leaned into the spotlight, ready to play the grateful, blushing bride. She lived for an audience, and she was ready to milk this unexpected moment for every ounce of attention. The man in the gray suit stopped 3 feet away from her. The 2 security guards flanked him, crossing their arms over their chests. The entire room held its collective breath. The waiter standing near the walls stopped moving. "Vanessa Green?" the man asked. His voice cut through the stagnant air loud and clear. Vanessa lifted the microphone to her mouth. She offered a soft, practiced chuckle. "Yes," she answered, her voice amplified through the speaker system, echoing off the high ceiling. "I am Vanessa Green." "Well, I am Vanessa Lawson now," she corrected herself, flashing a coy smile toward Brad, who stood near the head table. The process server did not smile back. He did not offer congratulations. He pulled the thick envelope from beneath his arm and held it out toward her. "You are being served," he announced. He did not lower his voice to spare her feelings. He did not care about her dignity or the 200 prominent guests watching their every move. He spoke with the volume of an official executing a sworn duty. "This is a notice of a civil asset freeze," he stated, projecting his words across the dance floor. "It accompanies a federal indictment filing for wire fraud, identity theft, and civil conspiracy. You are ordered to cease all financial transactions immediately." Because Vanessa was still holding the live microphone right next to the man, every single syllable broadcasted over the state-of-the-art sound system. The words wire fraud and identity theft boomed from the speakers, vibrating against the walls. The sound hit the crowd like a physical blow. I watched from the shadows of the hallway, gripping my purse. The trap had sprung. The words hung in the air, wrapping around the bride like a heavy iron chain. The wealthy attendees, sitting at the silk-draped tables, froze in shock. A few people gasped. Brad's mother dropped her crystal flute. It hit the table, spilling champagne across the pristine white linen. Brad stood frozen, his face turning the color of ash. He stared at the man in the gray suit, processing the exact legal terms I had warned him about in the coffee shop just 2 days prior. The puzzle pieces were slamming together in his mind. Vanessa stared at the extended envelope. Her polite smile vanished. Her jaw went slack. The illusion of the perfect heiress crumbled in an instant. She reached out with trembling fingers and took the heavy package. The weight of the paper made her hands dip. It contained every single receipt, every screenshot, and every forged document Marcus Davis had compiled. She ripped the top flap open. She reached inside and pulled out the first stack of papers. I knew exactly what sat on the very top. It was the emergency ex-parte order signed by a federal judge. Right below that lay the certified copy of the deed of trust bearing my forged signature, and beneath that were the bank logs showing the $150,000 loan funneled into her fake corporate account. Vanessa's eyes darted frantically across the bold black text. Her pupils dilated. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a sickly pale hue. Her chest hitched as she stopped breathing. She flipped to the second page. She saw the seal of the court stripping her of all access to her bank accounts. She saw the itemized list of stolen funds. She saw the name of the notary from our mother's real estate office. She looked up at the process server, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. She could not form a single word. She turned her head, scanning the room, looking for our mother. Barbara was standing near the bar, her own face a mask of pure horror. Our mother understood the legal terms. She knew her own brokerage was implicated in the civil conspiracy. She knew her platinum credit card, declining 10 minutes ago, was not a bank glitch. The federal freeze had locked them both in a cage. Barbara took a step backward, bumping into a waiter, trying to distance herself from the radioactive fallout occurring on the dance floor. She did not rush forward to protect her golden child. She pressed her back against the wall, paralyzed by the reality of her own impending ruin. Vanessa looked back down at the documents. The physical reality of the paperwork shattered her delusion. She could not gaslight a federal judge. She could not manipulate a bank ledger the way she manipulated our family. The lies she had spun for 6 months were dead on arrival. Her hands began to shake. A fine tremor started in her fingers and spread up her arms. The thick stack of legal papers slipped from her grasp. Dozens of pages scattered across the polished hardwood floor, covering the monogrammed letters of her new married name. The wireless microphone slipped from her right hand. It plummeted toward the ground. The heavy metal casing struck the dance floor. The impact triggered a sharp, piercing feedback loop. A high-pitched screech tore through the speakers, forcing several guests to cover their ears. The harsh electronic squeal served as the perfect soundtrack for the collapse of her empire. Vanessa dropped to her knees right in the middle of the scattered court documents. The pristine silk of her custom gown pooled around the evidence of her felonies. She stared at the forged deed resting near her expensive shoe. Then she opened her mouth and screamed. It was not a cry of sorrow. It was a raw, guttural shriek of a narcissist realizing the audience finally saw her true face. The sound scraped against the ceiling, raw and ugly. She pulled at her blonde hair, tearing the delicate lace veil from her head. The crowd erupted into chaos. Whispers turned into shouts. Chairs scraped against the floor as people stood up trying to see what was happening. I remained perfectly still near the exit, taking in the wreckage. I had not laid a single finger on her. I had simply handed the truth to the people who possessed the power to hold her accountable. The legal execution was complete. The next move belonged to the groom. The shrill feedback from the fallen microphone cut off as one of the security guards kicked the device across the hardwood floor. Vanessa remained crouched on the polished surface. Her custom silk gown was tangled around her ankles, stained with dust from the shoes of panicked guests who had begun backing away from the center of the room. She reached out with trembling fingers, trying to gather the loose sheets of the federal court order that fluttered under the draft from the open doors. Her blonde hair fell across her face in wet, unstyled clumps, stripping away the immaculate illusion she had spent months cultivating. Brad did not rush forward to help her up. He stood frozen near the head table, his eyes fixed on the scattering of legal paperwork at his wife's knees. The shockwave of the revelation had slammed into him with the force of a freight train. For months he had navigated wedding planners, catering deposits, and floral arrangements, believing he was partnering with an ambitious, successful woman. Now the baseline of his reality had shattered in front of 200 witnesses. A sharp spike of adrenaline drove Brad into motion. He strode across the monogrammed dance floor, past the weeping bride, ignoring the way her fingers reached out to graze the hem of his tailored trousers. He knelt down on one knee, scooping up several pages of the manila packet that had spilled across the floor. He did not care about the etiquette of the room or the whispers exploding from the surrounding tables. His hands shook slightly as he flicked past the emergency injunction and stared directly at the financial exhibits. The pages laid out the truth with ruthless legal clarity. Brad saw the name of the LLC registered to Vanessa's residential address. He saw the ledger detailing the $150,000 disbursement. He saw the bank routing numbers and the official seal of the state records office. But what stopped his breath entirely was the signature line of the security deed. It bore my name forged in an approximation of my handwriting, backed by a notary stamp belonging to an employee at my mother's real estate firm. The memory of our conversation at the independent coffee shop flashed violently through his mind. He remembered the calm way I had looked at him across the worn vinyl booth, sliding the check back and offering a quiet warning to check his fiancée's credit background before signing a marriage license. He had dismissed my words as the bitter envy of a struggling sibling. He had thought I was drowning in credit card debt and trying to sabotage a happy occasion. The puzzle pieces clicked together with the sickening precision of a vault door locking into place. Every excuse Vanessa had given for her tight control over the wedding finances, every evasive answer regarding her bank accounts, and every derogatory comment she had casually dropped about my financial status took on a terrifying new meaning. She had not been protecting a family budget. She had been hiding a crime spree funded entirely by her younger sister. "You stole your sister's identity to pay for this?" Brad asked. His voice did not carry the booming volume of a theatrical outburst. It was low, hollow, and laced with absolute bottomless disgust. Vanessa stopped sobbing for a fraction of a second. She looked up at him, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks, distorting her features into a desperate mask. She scrambled forward on her knees, trying to wrap her arms around his waist. "Brad, please, you do not understand," she wailed, her voice cracking against the quiet acoustics of the hall. "It was not like that. It was just a temporary arrangement. We were going to pay it back once the estate settled. My mother said it was fine. Mom helped us set it up. It was just a misunderstanding about family property." She pointed a frantic, manicured finger toward the edge of the room where Barbara was cowering against the wall. Barbara realized she had been dragged into the center of the disaster. She abandoned her position by the bar and rushed across the hardwood floor, clutching her expensive cashmere shawl like armor. She dropped to her knees beside her oldest daughter, trying to scoop up the remaining pages of the court order and cover them from view with the fabric of her wrap. "Stop staring!" Barbara yelled at the crowd of wealthy guests, her voice cracking with hysteria. "This is a private family matter. Go back to your tables. The dinner will be served in a moment. Stop looking at her!" Several prominent members of the local country club turned away in sheer embarrassment, muttering apologies to one another as they headed rapidly toward the exit doors. The high society illusion had evaporated into thin air, leaving behind the stale odor of panic and public exposure. Brad did not flinch when Vanessa clutched at his suit jacket. He slowly, deliberately peeled her fingers away from his clothes, treating her touch like something unclean. He stood up to his full height, looking down at the woman he had legally married less than an hour ago, as if she were a total stranger. The romantic affection that had carried him down the aisle had been entirely incinerated, replaced by a cold, clinical revulsion. "You are a felon," Brad said, the words falling like lead weights between them. "We just signed a marriage license an hour ago, and you are hundreds of thousands of dollars deep in federal fraud. You lied to my face, you used my family name to host a criminal enterprise, and you destroyed your own sister to pay for a party." Vanessa opened her mouth to launch another defense, but no words came out. The well of excuses had run dry. Without saying another word, Brad let the papers slip from his fingers, watching them flutter down onto the silk skirt of her gown. He turned his back on the screaming bride. He did not look at Barbara, who was still frantically gathering stray sheets of paper. He walked away from the head table with a steady, unhurried stride, ignoring the reporters and photographers who had begun gathering near the main entrance. He pushed open the heavy oak doors of the country club and walked straight out into the bright afternoon sunlight, leaving Vanessa alone in the absolute wreckage of her own making. I stepped out of the shadows of the hallway and walked back into the grand reception room. The physical atmosphere of the country club had shifted from a sophisticated, high society gathering to the site of a natural disaster. Half of the tables were already empty. Wealthy guests were standing near the exits, clutching their purses and suit jackets, whispering frantically to one another. Waiters moved silently along the edges of the room, carrying away trays of untouched champagne glasses. Nobody wanted to be associated with a federal crime. They were fleeing the sinking ship to protect their own reputations. I walked with a slow, steady pace, stopping near the edge of the monogrammed dance floor. I did not hide. I wanted them to see me. Vanessa was still kneeling on the hardwood floor, surrounded by the scattered legal documents. She watched Brad walk out the main doors. When she realized her wealthy groom was never coming back, she slowly turned her head. Her eyes scanned the remaining crowd. She saw me standing near the ice sculpture. A primal rage twisted her features. The sorrow vanished, replaced by pure, unhinged malice. She scrambled to her feet. The heel of her expensive shoe caught on the hem of her custom silk gown, tearing the delicate fabric. She did not care. She kicked the shoe off and charged across the floor barefoot. Dark streaks of mascara ran down her cheeks, staining the front of her white dress. She looked like a feral animal backed into a corner. "You ruined my life!" Vanessa shrieked. Her voice echoed off the high ceilings, raw and jagged. She closed the distance between us in seconds. She raised her right hand, curling her fingers into a tight fist, aiming straight for my face. A few of the remaining guests gasped, waiting for the physical impact. I did not flinch. I did not take a step back. I stood my ground, holding my small clutch purse, keeping my posture rigid. My lack of fear broke her momentum. Vanessa's fist stopped inches from my cheek, shaking with unspent rage. She knew hitting me would only add an assault charge to her growing list of felonies. "You did this to me," she spat, her breath smelling of stale wine and panic. "You planned this to humiliate me because you are jealous. You destroyed my wedding." I looked at her raised hand, and then looked directly into her bloodshot eyes. "I did not forge the signatures, Vanessa," I replied. My voice was calm, steady, and pitched loud enough for every single person left in the ballroom to hear. "I did not steal an identity. I did not funnel stolen cash into a fake corporate account. You built your entire life on a crime. I just handed you the receipt." Before Vanessa could muster another excuse, Barbara stepped between us. Our mother had abandoned her attempts to hide the court documents. She inserted herself into the confrontation, carrying the same arrogant delusion she had wielded for 3 decades. She believed she was still the authority figure in the room. She believed she could fix a federal indictment with a stern command. "Selena, stop this nonsense immediately," Barbara ordered, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You have made your point. You embarrassed your sister in front of her new family. Now take out your phone, call your lawyer, and tell him to drop the charges. Tell the bank it was a misunderstanding." I stared at the woman who had given birth to me. She was standing in the middle of a ruined reception hall, demanding I erase a paper trail of felony fraud to save her social status. "You cannot cancel a federal wire fraud investigation, Mom," I explained, treating her like a slow child. "It is not a restaurant reservation. The judge signed the order. The funds are seized. I do not care about the legal details," Barbara snapped, her voice rising into a hysterical pitch. "We are your family. You are going to fix this right now, or you will never be welcome in my home again. Do you understand me?" I let her empty threat hang in the air. For 29 years, I had twisted myself into knots trying to earn a place in her home. I had accepted the cheap gifts, the backhanded compliments, and the constant demands for money, just to feel like I belonged. I looked at the 2 women standing in front of me and felt nothing but a clean, sweeping relief. The tether was cut. "There is no family," I stated, my words dropping like stones into a quiet pond. "You kept me around to be a credit score. You used me as a financial safety net, and when I was not useful to you, I was just an embarrassment in a cheap dress. I am done paying for your comfort." Barbara opened her mouth to argue, but a sudden shift in the lighting cut her off. Through the tall floor-to-ceiling windows of the country club ballroom, bright flashes of color pierced the twilight. Red and blue lights swept across the manicured lawn, reflecting off the crystal chandeliers inside. The frantic strobing illuminated the faces of the remaining guests. Vanessa spun around, dropping her raised hand. She stared at the windows, her jaw going slack. The local police did not handle civil asset disputes, but my sister had not just bounced a check. She had crossed federal banking lines. She had utilized wire transfers to move stolen funds from a secured land loan into a shell company. When Marcus Davis filed the emergency ex parte order with the judge, the sheer volume of the financial crimes triggered a direct response from the bank fraud division. They notified the authorities the moment the vault locked. Heavy footsteps echoed in the grand hallway. The oak doors pushed open for the second time that evening. 2 uniformed police officers walked into the venue. They wore tactical vests and carried an unmistakable air of authority. They did not stop to ask the catering manager for directions. They scanned the room, their eyes locking onto the bride standing in the center of the floor. They bypassed the empty tables and approached us. The few guests lingering near the bar pulled their phones out, capturing the moment. Vanessa Green, the taller officer, asked, his hand resting near his duty belt. Vanessa took a step backward, shaking her head no, she whimpered, looking toward our mother for protection. "Tell them it is a mistake, Mom. Tell them it is family property." Barbara did not step forward. She did not defend her golden child. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate step away from Vanessa, distancing herself from the impending arrest. The instinct for self-preservation overrode her maternal loyalty. She left her favorite daughter standing alone. Vanessa Green, the officer, repeated, stepping into her personal space. "We have a warrant for your arrest regarding multiple counts of identity theft and wire fraud. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "I cannot go to jail," Vanessa cried, her voice breaking into a terrified sob. "Look at me. I am getting married today. I am in my wedding dress." The officers did not care about the custom silk or the imported lace. The taller cop reached out and grabbed her wrist firmly, pulling her arm behind her back. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed sharply through the quiet room. The sound was definitive. It was the closing of a heavy iron door. They secured her wrists over the delicate buttons of her gown. Vanessa sobbed openly, her tears leaving dark tracks down her neck. She did not fight them. The reality of the cold steel against her skin drained the last ounce of defiance from her body. "Let us go," the second officer instructed, guiding her forward by the elbow. They walked her across the dance floor. The bride took her final march down the aisle, barefoot and in restraints. She passed by the melting ice sculpture and the abandoned champagne flutes. The remaining members of high society watched in stunned silence as the woman who had tried so hard to buy their approval was escorted out of the building like a common thief. Barbara watched her daughter disappear through the doors. She sank into a nearby chair, pressing her hands over her face, shivering in her silver dress. She knew the investigation would trace back to the notary stamp at her real estate office. She knew her own reckoning was only days away. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of their ambition. The red and blue lights continued to flash through the windows, casting long, shifting shadows across the floor. I did not feel a rush of joyful victory. I felt the quiet, solid peace of a debt finally settled. I turned around and walked toward the side exit, leaving the empty ballroom behind me. Brad did not wait for the dust to settle inside the country club. On Monday morning, the very moment the county courthouse unlocked its glass doors, his legal team filed an emergency petition for an annulment. He refused to file for a standard divorce. A divorce implies a valid, legitimate partnership existed in the first place. Brad wanted the legal record to state clearly that the union was based solely on criminal fraud. He severed all ties, wiping Vanessa from his life like a toxic investment. His lawyer sent a courier directly to the holding cell where Vanessa was awaiting her arraignment. The courier handed her the annulment papers through the metal bars. Brad changed his phone number. His parents hired private security for their estate and blocked my mother on every available communication channel. The wealthy, high society safety net my sister thought she had secured vanished into thin air before she even had time to post a single wedding photograph online. The justice system operates with a slow, grinding certainty. Vanessa spent the next several months trapped in a legal nightmare trying to negotiate a plea deal. She hired a defense attorney using the last bit of credit she could scrape together, begging the federal prosecutor for leniency. She claimed she was a first-time offender. She tried to frame the identity theft as a simple misunderstanding between siblings over an inheritance. She played the victim, crying in the deposition room. But Marcus Davis, my civil litigation attorney, made sure the federal judge received the audio recording from the rehearsal dinner. The judge heard my sister openly bragging about spending the cash. The judge heard her arrogant voice claiming she spared no expense to match her bank account. Her defense strategy collapsed instantly. When the final sentencing date arrived, the courtroom felt vast and empty. There were no prominent socialites sitting in the gallery. Brad did not show up to offer character witness testimony. I sat in the back row wearing my work scrubs, watching the judge hand down the final verdict. The judge looked down from the bench and delivered a scathing reprimand about greed and manipulation. The gavel struck the wooden block with a loud crack. The court sentenced Vanessa to 4 years in a federal correctional facility. She was found guilty of aggravated identity theft, bank fraud, and wire fraud. The judge also ordered strict financial restitution. As the bailiff led her away in a drab tan prison uniform, she looked back over her shoulder at me. There was no arrogance left in her eyes. She looked small, terrified, and utterly alone. The woman who was willing to destroy my life to rule the country club was now assigned a thin mattress in a concrete cell. Her custom silk gown was traded for standard-issue canvas shoes. My mother, Barbara, genuinely assumed she could escape the fallout. She believed her status as a respected real estate broker in Tulsa would shield her from the criminal probe. She was terribly wrong. Federal investigators traced the forged deed of trust directly back to the notary stamp used inside her office. The agents interviewed Diane Foster, the employee who processed the fake signature. Diane flipped the moment the agents mentioned prison time. She testified under oath that Barbara explicitly ordered her to authenticate the fraudulent paperwork to secure the loan. The consequences hit my mother like a wrecking ball. The State Real Estate Commission convened an emergency hearing and revoked Barbara's license permanently. Her lucrative career evaporated overnight. Without her substantial commission checks, she could not maintain the mortgage on the large suburban brick house. The civil court ordered both my mother and sister to repay the lender every single dime of the stolen $150,000 plus exorbitant legal fees. Barbara was forced to liquidate her entire life. She sold the house, the luxury cars, the crystal decanters, and the expensive jewelry. She auctioned off her designer handbags just to pay the restitution and keep herself out of a jail cell. The financial penalty left her destitute. She packed her remaining clothes into cheap cardboard boxes and moved into a tiny, rundown apartment on the extreme outskirts of town. The building lacked central air conditioning, and the hallways smelled of old cooking oil and damp carpet. The high society women she used to invite over for wine and gossip stopped returning her calls. The country club officially revoked her membership due to the public scandal. One afternoon, she ran into a former wealthy client at a discount grocery store. The client turned her shopping cart around and walked down a different aisle, pretending Barbara did not exist. My mother now spends her days sitting in a cramped living room, staring at a blank television screen, isolated from the world she valued more than her own children. She traded her real family for an aesthetic and ended up with nothing. While their lives turned to ash, I focused entirely on rebuilding mine. The federal ruling provided the exact legal documentation I needed to repair the damage to my name. I sent the certified court orders to the major credit bureaus. Within a month, the fraudulent loan was wiped from my record permanently. The red warning banner disappeared from my banking portal. My credit score rebounded immediately, returning to the excellent tier I had worked so hard to achieve. The lending bank lifted the lien on my father's 50 acres of ranch land, restoring my rightful ownership. The property was safe. I did not buy the small townhouse I originally planned to purchase. After enduring the suffocating drama of my family, I realized I did not want to share walls with neighbors or worry about the rules of a homeowners association. I wanted space to breathe. I drove out to the 50 acres one afternoon and walked through the tall, wild grass. The land was quiet, bordered by mature oak trees and a winding freshwater creek. My medical billing job provided a steady, reliable income. With my flawless credit restored, I applied for a legitimate construction loan. The bank approved my application without a single moment of hesitation. I hired a trusted local contractor and drew up the blueprints myself. I did not want a sprawling mansion to show off to strangers. I wanted a sturdy, sunlit house with large glass windows and a wide wraparound porch. I spent the next 12 months watching the foundation pour, the wooden frame go up, and the metal roof settle into place. The smell of fresh-cut lumber and wet earth filled the air. Every nail driven into the wood felt like a tangible victory over the people who had tried to bury me. It is a Tuesday morning in late October. The Oklahoma air carries a crisp autumn chill. I am 30 years old now. I am sitting on the back porch of my newly finished house. The thick wooden planks beneath my rocking chair feel solid and permanent. I hold a ceramic mug filled with dark coffee, watching the sunrise paint the morning sky in shades of brilliant orange and soft pink. A pair of deer graze near the edge of the tree line, unbothered by my presence. I do not hear the hum of city traffic. I do not hear the passive-aggressive insults of a mother who wishes I was someone else. I do not hear the cruel laughter of a sister who viewed me as a disposable asset. The only sound out here is the wind moving gently through the oak leaves. I own this land. I own this house. I built my sanctuary using my own honest labor. If you are dealing with people who only value you for what they can extract from you, take a long, hard look at your situation. Family is supposed to provide a safe harbor, not a predatory trap. You do not owe your future, your finances, or your peace of mind to people who treat you like a credit line. Setting a firm boundary might feel like starting a war, but sometimes you have to burn the old bridges to light the way forward. You have to stop setting yourself on fire to keep manipulative people warm. I lost a toxic family, but sitting here on my own land, drinking my own coffee, I know I made the right choice. I gained absolute peace. Thank you for listening to my story on Grape Vengeance. Remember to protect your peace, know your worth, and never let anyone else hold the pen to your life story.